My name is Evelyn Ward. I turned 70 this spring, and most days I still move with the quiet rhythm of someone who believes peace can be maintained if you just keep the kettle warm and your voice soft. Sunday evenings are my favorite. The house slows down, the sun fades across the kitchen tiles, and I usually end the day with a phone call from my son's wife, Marissa. That night, her tone was bright as always. She asked if I'd remembered to pick up decaf coffee from the store, mentioned a sale on linens, and laughed about how Derek had burned another batch of toast. It was ordinary talk, comfortable in its smallness. When she said, "All right, Mom, talk tomorrow," I smiled and set my phone on the table beside the teapot. The water hissed softly. I thought the call had ended. Then her voice came again, sharper, unguarded. "Living with her is unbearable," she said, her tone flattening like a blade laid against glass. "But we're only staying because of her money." A pause. Then laughter, hers, and another woman's voice, warm and knowing. Her mother. The sound was light cruel in its ease. For a moment I thought I'd misheard, that perhaps they were speaking of someone else. But my name slipped through again, unmistakable in Marissa's mouth. I reached for the phone, my hand shaking so slightly that I almost dropped it. The screen was still lit, the line still open. Their laughter filled my kitchen. My house, the same one they called home. I stood there, the smell of chamomile steeping around me, the clock ticking out seconds that suddenly felt unbearable. I didn't speak. I didn't hang up. I just listened until their conversation drifted into casual gossip, as if nothing had been said. When the line finally went silent, I turned it off and sat down. The chair creaked under my weight. The quiet after their laughter felt too large for the room. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling each slow, uncertain beat, and stared at the empty doorway where I knew they'd walk through in the morning, smiling polite, pretending everything was fine. I didn't plan to confront them. Not yet. I needed to understand what kind of truth I had just heard. How do you sleep after hearing the truth from people who share your roof? I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, my phone still warm in my hand. The call log stared back at me, proof that I hadn't imagined it. Outside, the crickets sang their usual rhythm, but inside, the world had gone hollow. Upstairs, a door creaked open. Marissa's voice floated down the hallway, soft, sweet, the kind she used when she wanted to sound considerate. "Evelyn, we're heading to bed. Do you need anything before I turn off the porch light?" My throat tightened, but I managed, "No, thank you." She lingered a beat. Maybe expecting warmth, maybe testing it. "All right then. Sleep well." I listened to her footsteps fade, then the faint whisper of her speaking to Derek behind their door. The tone was low. Quick, too quick. I couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm of someone who didn't want to be overheard. I turned off the kitchen light and walked down the hall. The pictures on the wall, family dinners, birthdays, holidays, seemed to watch me pass. Each smile looked thinner now, painted on by people who knew how to pretend. In the living room, Derek's wallet lay on the armchair half open. Inside was a folded grocery receipt totaled far higher than what we'd discussed that morning. I set it back exactly as I'd found it, my pulse steady, but slow. The clock struck 11. The house exhaled pipes, settling floorboards, sighing, but none of it calmed me. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat at the edge of the bed. For a long while, I stared at the space between my shoes, trying to fit this new truth into the home I had built for them. I thought of the words she'd said, how easy they sounded, how rehearsed. I placed the phone on the nightstand and whispered into the dark, not to anyone, just to the air itself. Not yet. If I wanted to know what kind of people they really were, I'd have to let them keep believing I didn't know. When you start seeing through the smiles, can you ever unsee them again? The next morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen, warm and steady, the kind of light that used to make me feel safe. I cracked eggs, poured coffee, and let the ordinary motions steady my hands. Every sound felt exaggerated. The scrape of the chair, the tap of the spoon, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Marissa walked in first, her hair perfectly pinned, her voice syrupy. "Good morning, Eveline. You were up early again." "I slept lightly," I said, setting a plate on the table. "Habit." She smiled too brightly. "You do too much." "We keep saying we'll handle breakfast, don't we, Derek?" My son entered, then rubbing his eyes the morning paper tucked under his arm. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, reaching for his mug. He didn't look up. Marissa brushed a crumb off the table that wasn't there. "You really should let us help more," she added, glancing at Derek as if rehearsing care for an audience. I slid a plate toward her. "You already do plenty." She laughed lightly. "That's sweet, but I mean it. This house wouldn't run without you." Derek grunted agreement, eyes still on the headlines. "Yeah, Mom keeps everything together." The words should have comforted me, but they landed hollow. Marissa's tone lingered in my mind from the night before, unbearable. I studied her as she poured orange juice, the way her eyes flicked toward Derek before every smile. "Did you need anything from the store?" she asked. "I'm running errands later." "No," I said. "Not today." She nodded, pressing her lips together, her cheerful mask slipping for half a breath. Then she straightened and said brightly, "Maybe I'll pick up flowers." This kitchen deserves something cheerful. Derek folded his paper, kissed her temple, and left for work without finishing his coffee. Marissa stood by the sink, humming softly, her reflection in the window, faint but watchful. I rinsed my cup, dried my hands, and spoke just loud enough for her to hear. The house already has what it needs. Her humming stopped only for a second before she began again, too light, too forced. How many times can kindness be mistaken for weakness before it breaks you? After Derek left for work and Marissa disappeared into her phone, I walked through the quiet halls of the house, my house. Every corner carried a piece of memory I had once called love. I'd built it 10 years ago after my husband Graham passed. I remember the real estate agent warning me, "It's too big for one person." But I wanted space for family dinners, birthdays, grandkids who might come visit someday. I poured my savings and part of Graham's insurance, nearly $200,000, into the down payment. I chose the maple floors myself, picked the pale blue shutters, the ones Graham always said reminded him of summer skies. When Derek married Marissa, I offered them the upstairs. "Stay until you find your footing," I'd said. Derek was between jobs then, and Marissa had just started her little online clothing boutique. I gave her $5,000 to help with inventory, fabric, packaging, photography equipment. She'd hugged me so tightly I almost cried. "I'll pay you back. I promise," she'd said. I hadn't asked her to. In those early months, I'd wake to the smell of coffee, brewing, laughter drifting from upstairs. Derek fixed the fence, Marissa made cinnamon bread, and for a time, I believed we were a family rebuilding. Then came the small shifts, the locked door when I knocked, the whispered calls that stopped when I entered a room. Marissa's boutique grew, but I never saw orders leaving the house. Boxes came in, money went out, yet no explanation followed. One evening, I'd mentioned the rising utility bills. Marissa laughed, waving a manicured hand. "You shouldn't worry about that, Eveline. We're all family here." At the time, I took it as comfort. Now I hear it differently. A dismissal, a claim. I stood at the base of the staircase, looking up toward the closed guest room door where they slept. The paint was still perfect. The banister still shined, but the warmth I'd built this home for had gone thin. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a stage where kindness had become currency, and I was the one funding the performance. When did watching become the only way to stay safe in your own home? The following week, I began writing things down. It started with a date, then a word, then a total. Small notes on the back of grocery receipts, later copied neatly into a spiral notebook I kept tucked in my dresser drawer. Monday. Marissa ordered new curtains online. We already had some. Tuesday, Derek asked if my pension still deposited on the 10th. Little things, but small things grow roots if you watch long enough. That Thursday afternoon, I stood at the sink when Marissa's voice carried down from upstairs. Yes, I told him she approved the transfer. She said, a sharpness hiding beneath her sugar. I froze, the water running over my fingers. No, she doesn't check it herself. She trusts us. I didn't hear the rest. My heart was too loud. That evening, I watched Derek at dinner. He pushed peas around his plate, distracted. Rough day, I asked. He shrugged. Just numbers. Marissa's supplier raised prices again. We might need to move some things around. Supplier? I kept my tone light. Marissa smiled without showing teeth. For the boutique, fabric costs are unpredictable. Ah, I said, noting the word. Fabric. After they went upstairs, I opened my notebook again. Supplier, I wrote. Transfer. Approved. The next morning, I went through the kitchen drawers where I stored mail. 2 new credit card statements sat near the bottom, both addressed to me. I scanned the purchases. Electronics gift cards, boutique software subscriptions, none of which I'd ever used. Marissa walked in tying her robe. Oh, I meant to bring those up. Some mix-up with shipping accounts. Derek said he'd handle it. I smiled. Good. I'm sure he will. She blinked, her mouth half open, then nodded and poured herself coffee. I kept my eyes on her reflection in the window as I folded the envelopes and slipped them under my notebook later that night. They thought I was soft, but I'd spent 40 years keeping other people's records straight. I could track a lie as easily as I used to balance a ledger. Why does the truth feel lighter only after you say it aloud? I drove across town to Claudine's house that Friday morning, the air already thick with summer. We'd worked together years ago at the high school. She managed the budgets, I handled the staff schedules. She'd retired before me, but she never lost her habit of precision. Her porch plants were trimmed to perfect symmetry. She opened the door before I even knocked. Eveline Ward, she said, smiling. You look like you've been carrying something heavy. I suppose I have. Inside, she poured coffee without asking. We sat at her small kitchen table, the one that still had a stack of tax forms beside the salt shaker. I told her everything, the call that hadn't ended, the laughter, the credit card statements. Her face didn't change much as I spoke, only her eyes softened. When I finished, she stirred her coffee slowly. You always were generous, she said. Too generous. I thought I was helping them get started. You were, she said plainly. And they mistook that for permission. Happens more than you think. I swallowed hard. I can't prove everything yet, but something's wrong with the accounts. I just don't know where to start. Claudine pushed her mug aside and reached for a notepad. Start here, she said. Check every account where Derek has access. Savings secondary, checking any joint cards. Print your statements. Not just view them online. Banks delete history faster than people think. Her voice had the calm of someone who had cleaned up other people's messes for decades. And don't confront them yet, she added. You want facts, not arguments. Kindness without limits invites cruelty, Eveline. I learned that the hard way. I nodded, blinking back a heat that wasn't from the coffee. When I left, she handed me the notepad with a list of steps and said, Protect yourself first. Love them later if you still can. The paper trembled slightly in my hands as I drove home. For the first time in weeks, the air around me didn't feel like silence. It felt like strategy. What do you do when betrayal becomes a line item on your bank statement? That night, I sat at my desk with Claudine's notepad beside me. The house was quiet. Derek and Marissa were upstairs watching television, laughter faint through the floorboards. I opened my laptop. Heart steady, hands deliberate. The first account I checked looked normal: pension deposits, utilities, groceries. Then I saw it a transfer marked Marissa Ward Boutique. $50 here, $100 there, another $200. each entry small enough to go unnoticed, but frequent enough to build a pattern. I scrolled back 6 months. There were dozens of them. I whispered the totals as I added them on a yellow pad. 400, 800, 1200, 2700. My stomach turned as the numbers grew. Over $30,000 had been moved. Quietly, casually, always labeled as approved household transfers. I printed the statements one by one, listening to the slow hum of the printer like a clock ticking down. Each sheet that slid out was a confession they hadn't meant to sign. The date columns matched the days Marissa had mentioned supplies or Derek had stopped for errands. It was all there. The timeline, the motive, the proof. Footsteps crossed the hall upstairs. Marissa's voice carried faintly. The supplier said he'll need another payment this week. My jaw tightened. I slipped the papers into a manila folder and pushed it into the drawer beneath old photo albums. When I shut it, the sound was soft, but final. I heard Derek's steps on the stairs. I quickly minimized the screen. He appeared in the doorway, barefoot, smiling, as if the house wasn't built on lies. "Still up, Mom? You should get some rest." I was just balancing things, I said evenly. "Old habits die hard." He chuckled. "You and those numbers. Always checking every penny." "Yes," I said, eyes steady on him. "Every one of them." He kissed my forehead, then disappeared upstairs again. When the floorboards creaked closed, I reopened the screen. The cursor blinked at me beside another transfer, this one pending for tomorrow morning. I reached for the mouse and canceled it. Then I printed that too. When does silence stop being grace and start being surrender? Sunday dinner began the way it always did. Pot roast on the table, candles burning low. Derek saying grace in the same steady voice. Only this time my folder rested beneath the napkin at my side, and I could feel its weight more than the food in front of me. Marissa reached for the gravy boat, smiling like a hostess. "Everything looks wonderful, Eveline. You really shouldn't go to all this trouble." "I wanted tonight to be special," I said. My voice was calm even. "We should talk as a family." Derek glanced up, half wary. About what I set down my fork and looked at them both. About the call I heard last week. The one you forgot to hang up, Marissa. The room went still. Marissa froze mid-reach, her fingers curling around the handle of the dish. Derek's brow furrowed. "What call?" I folded my hands. "You said living with me was unbearable, that you were only staying for my money." Derek's chair scraped against the floor. "Mom, you must have misunderstood." "I didn't," I said quietly. Marissa's face flushed, then cooled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You misheard. It was a joke taken out of context." I slid the folder across the table. The papers fanned out black and white, impossible to deny. "Then explain these. Transfers from my account to your boutique over $30,000. Derek stared at the pages. "Marissa, what is this?" she snapped. "You told me she approved them." "I didn't," he began, but she was already standing. "This is ridiculous," she said sharply. "You'd be alone without us, Eveline. Who would cook for you? Keep you company? You need us." Her voice cracked on the last word. I felt something inside me settle cold, certain. I stood slowly, resting my palms on the table. "Then I'll start learning how to be alone." The candles flickered between us. Derek's lips parted, but no words came. Marissa's eyes darted to him, waiting for him to speak, but he stayed silent. I gathered the folder, tucking it beneath my arm. "Dinner's over," I said, and walked toward the doorway, leaving the plates untouched and the air thick with everything that could no longer be denied. Can a house breathe again once the poison is gone? The next morning, sunlight cut through the curtains like a quiet verdict. I heard them whispering upstairs, voices tight, hurried, shuffling drawers. By the time I stepped into the hallway, Derek was at the top of the stairs, his eyes red. "Mom," he said softly. "Can we talk?" I nodded toward the living room. "Down here." He followed, shoulders slumped. Marissa stood behind him, arms crossed, chin lifted as if defiance could erase guilt. I've thought about it. I began steady but tired. You both have 48 hours to move out. Derek's face crumpled. Mom, please, Marissa made mistakes, but we can fix this. I can fix it. You both made choices, I said. This isn't punishment. It's protection. Marissa's voice snapped like glass. Protection from your own family. That's cruel. I met her gaze. Cruel was stealing from someone who fed you. She scoffed, turning away. You'll regret this. I already did, I said quietly. Every time I let it happen. Derek stepped closer, hands trembling. If we leave, where will we go? I'll get a job, pay you back. I touched his arm. You don't owe me money, Derek. You owe yourself a life built honestly. Start there. He swallowed, hard eyes glistening. I never meant for this. I know, I said. But you let it happen. The clock ticked between us. Marissa muttered something under her breath and walked upstairs, her footsteps sharp against the floorboards. When the door closed behind her, Derek exhaled. I'll start packing. I nodded and went to the kitchen, where the phone waited on the counter. I dialed the number Claudine had written down for me, a lawyer she trusted. When the woman answered, I said I need to secure my property. Today. Her tone was brisk but kind. We'll start the paperwork. By evening, boxes lined the hallway. The next day, they were gone. The rooms echoed hollow but clean. I locked the front door, replaced the key, and leaned against the wall. Tears came slow and quiet. Not grief, something lighter. The air felt different, clearer. The house, for the first time in years, could finally breathe with me. When you finally keep your own light, what part of love do you still let shine? 3 months later, the house stood quiet, but alive again. The air no longer carried tension, only the faint scent of fresh paint and roses from the garden. A new brass porch light hung above the door, polished and solid. The engraving caught the sun, just so built by boundaries, kept by respect. Claudine came by that afternoon, her voice bright as always. It suits you, she said, tilting her head toward the light. Strong but elegant. I poured her tea, steady hands against a steady table. It feels honest, I said. We sat outside, the breeze soft against our sleeves. Claudine talked about her grandkids, her knitting group, the things that fill life once the noise fades. When she left, she squeezed my hand. Peace looks good on you, Eveline. After she drove off, I went to the mailbox. A single envelope weighted my son's handwriting. Inside, a short letter. Mom, I'm sorry. No excuses. I'm working again, trying to be better. I hope one day we can talk. Love, Derek. The paper trembled just slightly in my hands, not from pain, but from something gentler, a recognition of love reshaped, quieter, now cleaner. I folded the letter and placed it beneath the new porch light. The brass caught the evening sun, turning everything warm. For a moment, the house felt like it was breathing with me again. Slow and calm, I whispered into the soft air, this time it stays mine. Then I turned on the light. The glow spread across the porch, steady and sure, reaching only as far as I allowed.